Welcome, everybody. Thanks so much for being here today. We're really excited to have you. We think you're in for a really great session today, and we're excited to have you. First thing I'd like to do is to introduce our panelists for today. Please help me welcome first and foremost Kevin Sauer. Kevin Sauer is a workplace strategist and a thought leader with 20 years of experience globally with workplace strategy and corporate real estate, workplace analytics, and technology. Welcome, Kevin. We're glad to have you today. Thanks for being a part of our discussion. Next up, we have James Wu. James Wu is the founder and CEO of Innerspace, and James has dedicated really the last 20 years to building some award-winning products for some incredible technology startups like Platform Computing, Ripple, and Kobo, which I had the pleasure of working with him on. And lastly, please help me welcome Brennan. Brennan has significant contributions with customer success. He is our head of customer success here at Innerspace and brings to us a wealth of experience of solving problems for some really great clients globally. So welcome everybody to the panel. I really appreciate that. My name is Jennifer Shannon. I work with the business development team here at Innerspace. I'm so excited to have you here today. Just a couple of quick housekeeping things. Would encourage you to please put your questions in the chat as we carry on today, and we'll get to your questions at the end for sure. And if we can, we'll get to them throughout the presentation. And just a reminder that we'll be sending out the recording of this presentation to everyone in attendance. So certainly you could take notes, but we'll be sending this to you after the fact. So. I just want to run you through our agenda really quickly today. We're going to start out by defining some of the key terms that are involved in the space utilization industry. There's lots of sort of terms that are out there, but we're going to define for you some of the key terms that we have to give you a better understanding of some of the fundamentals. We're going to talk a little bit about how space utilization data is actually being captured. So what are the ways that companies are actually capturing this data on site? What are we optimizing for? What are companies actually, looking at? What are they trying to solve for? And how is this data being used currently in the space? We're going to run through some of those ways. And then we're going to have Kevin walk us through the evolution of the workplace and corporate real estate. So how have we seen space utilization change and evolve over time? And also we're going to have Kevin give us a look at where this industry is headed. So where do we predict where this is going to be going in the near future or even the distant future? And what are some of the things we think that we'll be solving for? And then we'll get to a Q&A and give you an opportunity to ask some of your questions. So with no further ado, why don't we start first with James, why don't we have you walk us through some of these key industry terms just to give us a really good fundamental understanding of some of the key phrases that we're talking about today.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. I think it's really important to start off this conversation with sort of a level set on what do some of these terms mean, because even things as commonly used and as fundamental to the conversation as occupancy and utilization can sometimes be misunderstood or just, I guess, defined differently amongst the different people who were part of the conversation. So just before this call, I was online looking around at how various players within the space define some of these terms, and everyone's use of it is slightly different. So certainly, we are not the be all end all of these definitions, but here's how we are going to be using them as we move forward throughout this presentation. So we kind of break up the terminology that we're going to talk about into fundamental, the stuff that everyone's talking about. And then on the next slide, I'll talk a little bit more about maybe some more advanced or some less commonly used terms, but ones that probably should become more commonly used because they're in many ways the more important things for us to be thinking about as we try and apply some of this data and some of these measurements to making change in the office, in the workforce. So, key industry terms. So some of the fundamental terms that we've all talked about for years now are occupancy and utilization. And occupancy, this will sound this should sound straightforward to everybody, but occupancy is really a measurement of how many people are in the space at any given time. And as simple as that sounds, there are lots of different ways in which we might look at occupancy, such that what we might observe in the space relative to what a measurement might tell you seems different, right? So are we talking about max occupancy, the peak number of people that was in a space over, say, an hour or a day? Right? Or are we talking about mean occupancy, the average number of people that was in a space over the course of the day? So if you're looking at data that says, occupancy was 10 in this room at 12 p.m., does that mean there were 10 people there for the entire hour? Is that hour the 11 to 12 p.m. hour, or is it the 12 to 1 p.m. hour? Does it mean it was the max number of people that were seen over that hour, whichever hour it is we're talking about? So even something as simple as occupancy can have a lot of subtleties to it that need to be understood and documented and defined so that we can have a useful a useful and shared understanding of what it is we're talking about. If something as simple as occupancy is confusing, utilization doesn't get any better, right? It's utilization is talking about how is the space being used relative to its capacity, right? And we can really think of capacity in two different ways. One can be its occupancy, how many people can the space hold? That the number of people the space could possibly hold could be thought of in terms of the fire marshal's kind of definition. The max number of bodies you can safely cram into the space is X. More commonly, it's probably thought of as like, how many seats can this space comfortably, how many people can this space comfortably sit? You know, how many seats are around the conference table? How many desks are in the neighborhood? So that's one way to define capacity. Another maybe less obvious way to define capacity is in terms of time. Like if we have an 8-hour workday, there's 8 hours of time in which a space could be quote unquote in use. And so if you've got, if anyone is in a space, occupying it, making use of that space for 4 hours of that 8-hour time, we might say that its utilization with respect to time is around 50%. So even these two fundamental space measurements, space performance measurements, are actually a little bit more complex than they might seem on the surface. On this slide, there's a couple of terms that maybe are a little bit less commonly used, and unfortunately, they're also ones that I personally believe are a little bit more valuable for people to start thinking about. They're a little bit more advanced measures of space performance because they start to consider not just, you know, how much space is being occupied by how many people and for how long, but they really start to bring in the human element of space usage and start to measure that more ephemeral interaction between humans and what they need out of space and how the space is performing in supporting their needs while in the space, right? So things like mobility is an assessment of how much are people moving in and around the building or space while they're on site. You know, there's different ways we can assess it. We can talk about how many floors do people go to, how many different zones do they interact with over the course of the day, how many different groups of people are they interacting with over the course of the day. And mobility is really important to understand and measure because we don't want people coming back to the office just to sit in a seat. That's not that is, you know, as we look forward to where you know the value of the office space is going, it isn't going to be a sort of a bums in seats kind of thing. It's going to be, you know, you want people to come in to be interactive, you want people to come in to collaborate, and mobility is one of the measures that we can use to assess how effectively and how much collaboration people are doing when they're coming into the office. The second thing we'll talk about is space type affinities. You know, what types of spaces are being most preferred by the different teams and the different groups of people that are making use of them. So we can measure this by looking at the number of different visits that are being made to spaces of type A, maybe collaboration spaces, versus spaces of type B, enclosed meeting spaces. The reason space type affinity is important to understand and measure is because it's really one of the key things that's going to help us define what the future office has to be designed, how the future office has to be designed in order to make sure we are best supporting the needs of the people that are coming to it.
Thanks, James. Appreciate that. Next, I think it's probably, you know, we've got a good fundamental of what we're talking about here. Brennan, why don't you walk us through really quickly how this data is being captured currently in spaces?
Yeah, definitely. So as you can see on the screen, there's a lot of different ways that people are collecting this data. What I found really interesting recently is when speaking with a lot of clients, there are certain methods that are the incumbent from the pre-COVID days. And a lot of them, before they come to us, are getting 100% of their utilization data from one or maybe two of these sources. And the issue there is that some of these incumbent methods have significant gaps. And this can drastically affect the decision-making people are doing about their space. So, for example, the best one is badge swipes. This was one of the most common data sources that teams were using before the pandemic. And then when people started coming back, they started using it again. In the new hybrid working environment, this has been widely used to measure the success of return to office or RTO mandates. What is interesting is that this has led to the rise of the coffee badging phenomenon. This is where, you know, employees come into the office in the morning, swipe their badge, so they get counted as being in the office that day, grab a free coffee, maybe a breakfast, depending on how generous your employer's work environment is, and then they leave to go and work from home. Not only does this create a huge inefficiency due to employee commute times, it can also give workplace strategists a false sense of success when it comes to how well RTO is performing. So relying on one single source of data or even two can lead to very inefficient decision-making. You know, this is why I found that so many people currently are looking for more robust ways of collecting utilization data, occupancy data, and it includes a variety of these sources and using, you know, 5, 6 of these sources to be able to make their decisions, because knowing this gives them a better understanding of how their people and their spaces are performing, so they can make informed decisions about that. And I'm just really interested to hear, you know, Kevin and James, have either of you noticed a shift in the ways real estate teams are collecting this data and the sources that they're using?
I think probably the biggest thing is they are collecting more data. There's more opportunities to collect data, and also looking at that balance between qualitative and quantitative data. if you just look at the quantitative data, you're going to miss some fundamental aspects of how employees are actually experiencing the space and why they're showing up or doing the things that they're doing. So I think that's really critical, is kind of bringing those data sets together.
Yeah, I would add, like, I'm seeing kind of a bit of a bifurcation when we talk to the market. You know, there are the folks that have recognized, you know, they've been there, done that. They've recognized some of the gaps that you talked about. They've recognized the blind spots in just using one or maybe two of these different sources of data. And they are sort of jumping in. They're jumping in with both feet to say, okay, let's really get a complete picture of what's going on and use all the different sources we possibly can. Whether it's combining badge swipe data with Wi-Fi data, or, you know, in some cases leveraging cameras, assuming their security posture allows them to do such things. Combining, you know, pulling whatever data they may have from their space reservation systems while still combining it with you know, point studies that they're doing. So these are kind of the people that are leading the pack. But at the same time, we still come across people who are like, no, I don't know why we're talking to you. I'm fine with badge swipe, just getting badge swipe data. And, you know, with those conversations, it's a bit more of an education process to help them understand what they aren't seeing by just looking at these very singular sourced data points.
So James, this is a great segue into our next slide, which is essentially, what are companies trying to optimize for? What are they trying to look for?
These three things, really, right? I think primarily these days, you know, I think traditionally people have thought about space optimization, space utilization data as being in pursuit of streamlining their operational costs. How do we lower the cost of the second largest line item on our balance sheet, which is typically their real estate? So streamlining costs has traditionally been the pursuit of the primary goal that people are optimizing for. But I think increasingly the latter two, you know, creating winning workspaces and carbon footprint, are becoming increasingly important and actually overtaking that, what used to be the most important part, or what people thought of as the most important thing they were trying to achieve. You know, when it comes to creating winning workspaces, this is really about how do we, you know, quote unquote, earn the commute? How do we get people to choose to come back to the office such that we're not mandating them, right? So how do we understand what the new needs of the workplace, such that we're ensuring this optimal experience for the people that are coming, and trying to drive up the number of days per week that they choose to come in, trying to drive up the number of hours on average that they choose to stay, and overall trying to drive up the level of interactivity, the level of collaboration, the level of touch points between the people who are physically on site each day, in order to improve productivity and culture and all of those important things. So I think that one has probably become the number one thing that we're optimizing for using this data. And I think, you know, everybody understands the importance of reducing our carbon footprint and the impact we have on the environment. And our real estate, our use of physical space has a direct impact on our carbon footprint. And so the more we are able to, and, you know, the good news is that if we can streamline our carbon footprint, we can streamline our costs. So you know, 1 and 3 are kind of go hand in hand, but the importance of 3 is sort of generational and you know, at a humankind level, and not just an individual business level. So we can look at this data to help optimize for how do we lower our physical footprint, which is correlated to our carbon footprint. How do we reduce the amount of energy that we're using per square foot? How do we reduce the amount of waste that we are producing per employee who comes into the office?
I think probably a really good way for us to demonstrate like how this is playing out in the workplace is to look at some of the ways that this is actually being used, the way that, you know, the challenges that companies are trying to solve. Brennan, I wondered if you could sort of lead the discussion on how are companies using this data currently?
Yeah, definitely. I think, you know, James hit the nail on the head. The first two here seem to be what I talk to a lot of clients about. With the new hybrid working world, space needs aren't as cut and dry as they used to be in the past. And employees really are looking for a different office experience than what they had previously. As well, employers need to make sure, you know, they're creating offices that employees actually want to go to and are magnets for existing and new talent. You always want to make sure that as you start to hire, if you have in-office attendance, you're competing against remote companies. You have that mandate. Some people might see it as a detractor, but if the office is somewhere that people actually want to go, you know, new talent will actually be drawn to that. So really, for workplace strategists that I speak with, they really are thinking about things much broader than before, because they need to really understand things like occupancy for peak days of the week. So our Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday absolutely rammed, and Monday and Friday are a ghost town. What can we do to change that for those employees that are coming in during the busy days and the ones that come in on the shoulder days? What types of spaces are more frequently used by employees? This is a really great one. And this one kind of hits more on the real estate side, because really, you know, I was chatting with someone, they were looking at their, collaboration focused spaces, workstations, and then rejuvenation spaces. And as they added more people in the office with that are coming in a hybrid model, the rejuvenation spaces like ping pong tables, games rooms weren't being used at the same rate as they were in the past. Can we, with the hybrid working, are people actually going to be using these during their time in the office, or are they going to be, heads down focused on work? Can we repurpose these spaces to add more people into the office, and kind of create the spaces that people actually want when they're there? And then I think really beyond that too, a lot of people want to know what spaces are being used by specific teams. So we all know not every single team works the same when they're in the office. So workplace strategists really want to be able to understand the types of spaces that different teams use, so they can make the office optimized for their work styles. So for example, the sales and account management, they probably need more phone booths, meeting rooms for clients, whereas, developers will need more quiet, individual, head down workstations. These are the types of things that they're looking at so that they can inform the post-COVID, the new hybrid working model, and make sure that their office is working for everyone and all of their teams, because not all teams work the exact same way. And a big one that I found has been interesting is understanding occupancy thresholds, and understanding that when we get to a certain point, is there a direct correlation between that and a strain on resources that create a less than desirable work environment? So people get complaints, oh, I come in Wednesday, it's way too busy. What are that threshold? Is the threshold 60% occupancy, 70% occupancy? Okay, we're starting to hit that. What can we do to avoid that so people actually start not coming in on Wednesdays and not necessarily coming into the office at all? I've experienced this in the past. I would avoid going to the office on Wednesdays because I couldn't even get a key card to use the washroom. So those are the types of things that a lot of people are looking to do. And they really want to make sure that the office is conducive to the type of work that the employees are doing, and making it an enjoyable experience for them. But, pass it off to Kevin and James just to see, their thoughts around the first 2 points, and how, spatial intelligence, utilization, occupancy data can, help make the office more of a magnet.
Yeah, I'll get into this a little bit more in some subsequent slides, but I mean, things have changed significantly. There used to be a lot more consistency to workplace usage. So you kind of build your structure around that. Things have really changed. It's much more dynamic. There's not a lot of patterns emerging. So it's trying to understand what data do you need to really kind of bring this together to solve these equations. So it's building hypotheses, proving or disproving them through data, and then moving forward.
Yeah, I would add, I spoke earlier about the bifurcation, right? Of the folks that have a broader set of data at their disposal, they're using it in all of the many ways that both you and Kevin have described. For the folks that are maybe a little bit more limited in what data they have at hand, I think what they're finding is they're running into the so what problem. They're not exactly sure how to affect change with just badge swipe data, just occupancy counting, just how many people are on a floor or how many people are in the building data. And so, there's this, again, this split in the market where people who are looking a little bit more broadly and taking a more comprehensive approach to collecting this data are able to actually apply it and use it in various ways. And compared to those that are, kind of stuck with a more myopic viewpoint on what data is needed, they're running into a wall and not actually knowing what to do with it at all.
Definitely. That's great. And just speaking on the sustainability here piece here, I think it goes hand in hand with something on the next slide that we're going to talk about. And I do think that for a lot of people, meeting their sustainability goals really just needs to center around understanding how and when people are using a space. For example, if your building is at 10% occupancy on Friday, you may make that decision that Fridays the offices are closed, don't need to run AC as heavy, don't need to run heating, or even do you need the current space that you have? And carbon footprint can be directly correlated with the amount of space that people are using. So meeting sustainability goals also ties into cost cutting, which is something that I think, Jen, if you want to switch to the next slide, that we're going to just chat on right now. Perfect. So cost reduction, I think that this is something that people either come to us looking for, or they end up finding it after they've started looking at the data. But cost reduction from spatial intelligence data can have a big impact on any company. You have a clear understanding of how much space you actually need, and if you can reduce your overall footprint, this can obviously have a significant impact on companies' bottom lines. Leases don't need to be renewed, or as we've seen the cost of construction skyrocket in the last 5 years, construction can be avoided altogether. We can repurpose spaces. We don't necessarily need to build that brand new building. We can use what we've got, and that can be a huge cost savings. What I found really interesting is working with people who are doing post-occupancy studies for new buildings and finding out that utilization and occupancy data is leading them to understand that they can actually fit more people in the building than originally thought when the plans were rolled out. a lot of building plans were done pre-COVID, very cut and dry on how many people, how many employees in a specific area. With hybrid working, they've got an opportunity to move more people into their building, move them out of outdated spaces into the newer spaces, and then they can either, divest those assets, or they can renovate them, expand them, but it gives them the opportunity to understand, I don't necessarily need all the space. Or if, let's say, this is a funny one, if there's, a building on campus that people don't like going to, that like, oh, building 12, you got a meeting in building 12. Oh, that's the worst. I don't want to go there. It gives people the opportunity to move people into spaces that actually they find attractive to work in, and then you can divest those assets, and then that's a huge cost savings for you. So I think really that makes the return of investment for quality utilization data a no-brainer, because I think the savings can greatly outweigh any cost incurred by procuring a robust solution. But Kevin and James, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts in the kind of cost saving opportunities that can be found by having a robust data set.
I think to some degree, there's certainly cost savings to be had because we've got a lot of empty space and a lot of misalignment between kind of what employees need and what's available. I think part of the challenge is also looking kind of more forward on that of where are the opportunities where effectively your most expensive cost is your talent. So you're trying to balance, you may over-optimize workplace at the detriment of your talent, and therefore your net negative. So trying to find meaningful ways to reduce cost, continue business, and really embrace the needs of employees to keep the business driving forward.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with that. It is this, I mean, cost reduction at the expense of productivity, or the proverbial top line versus bottom line conversation. It isn't always all about cost, absolute cost reduction, right? We have seen customers who have used data that we've been able to provide them to optimize not their space, but where people sit in space, such that they're reducing the amount of time people are spent in transit between their neighborhood and the neighborhood that houses the team that they work most frequently with, or that they reduce the time in transit between where they are home based, the desk where their desk is, and the resource types that they use most frequently. And those kind of optimizations, they don't speak to a cost reduction at all, but they speak to an efficiency improvement and a productivity improvement. So it is this balance between those line item 1 and 2 on your balance sheet. You've got payroll and you've got real estate. If you cut real estate out entirely, well, if you've impacted the level of productivity of your payroll, the people you're paying with your payroll, then you've just moved your costs from one line item to another.
Yeah, I think that kind of ties in with the next point, which really nicely, which is kind of the data-driven design for workplaces. Because I also feel like this can be used the other way around, rather than reducing when you are ready to move into those new buildings, your lease is up, you want to move into a new space, or you're luckily enough to have the capital where you can build a brand new building, or you're expanding your campus. You can use this data to inform the design of the people who are supposed to be working in that building and build the right things. I think that can, make sure that any big investment that companies are making in new space is maximized, and, again, and not at the detriment of employee experience. I'd be interested to kind of hear, Kevin and James, your thoughts on that as well, in terms of informing the future office development with the data.
I mean, traditionally, a lot of design guidelines were kind of structured around the t-shirt model of you need some small, medium, large, maybe a couple extra large. You throw in the mix, so you satisfy everyone. But there wasn't a lot of data to understand, well, is that how people are using it? Does technology in those spaces matter as well? Now you can really kind of deep dive that and understand. I mean, one of the interesting metrics is that on average, less than 2 people are occupying any given meeting room. So probably don't need a lot of those extra large anymore, and might need to even rethink what's driving that kind of lower occupancy, and what can you do to improve that? Or is this a temporary thing and we need to still plan for a little bit more flexibility in the future? So a lot of dynamics at play right now.
Yeah, I think you touched on what I was going to comment, as well as the next bullet on this slide, right? Data-driven design sort of implies this forward-looking approach. Where am I going? How am I going to design the space based on the data I've got, right? But it can also be sort of data-informed redesign, looking back on what's happened in the space in the past, and then saying, okay, well, that's not working. Now I'm going to make some change and see whether or not that the change that I've made has affected the outcome I want. And so data-driven design often has people thinking, feeding back to me like, hey, well, we're not looking at a new space. We're not building anything out right now. We're not looking at taking on new leases. So I'm not designing anything. Well, it's not always about designing something. It's about maybe fixing mistakes that have been already, not mistakes, but fixing things that have already been done. And now the world and the environment has changed, and we've got to figure out how do we make some tweaks to it such that you're affecting the outcome you're trying to achieve.
And I think that segues really nicely into the next slide when we're talking about the evolution of the workplace.
Yeah, certainly. I think, one thing we can all agree on is that this industry is changing and has changed rapidly and is continuously changing. Kevin, I wonder if you could maybe walk us through what has changed, what has been the evolution of the workplace, certainly pre-pandemic to today.
Yeah, certainly. There's been a lot of shifts, and again, I'm going to a bit overgeneralization here, but getting kind of some of the key things that have shifted. So, again, pre-pandemic, most companies had predictable attendance. You kind of knew that most employees are in Monday through Friday, might trail off on a Friday. You could look across the course of a year and know that it's going to dip during holidays, summer periods, things like that. And it was fairly repeatable year after year. So you kind of plan for that, and there wasn't a lot of variance. And when it came to space usage, you also had a good sense of how space is being used, what types of activities are happening in space. So you could basically get a good enough consensus to continue to design space that way. And a lot of times the focus was really on desks. So if you've got 100 people, you need 100 desks, they need a place to collaborate. So let's add some collaboration rooms, some social space. And you'd often see a split of 70% desks, 30% collaboration. And most of the time, those desks are assigned. If you've got 100 people, you need 100 desks, maybe a couple extra for growth. And some people get into unassigned desks or maybe assigned to neighborhoods, but it's fairly static. So you could kind of have that one-to-one relationship. It also meant you could plan fairly well. You took a square foot per person, a square foot per desk. You could look at a floor plan and understand how many people should be able to accommodate in that floor. So you could plan out that the business is going to grow or we're going to move to a new site. Therefore, we need 3 floors rather than 2. And once you design the space, it was fairly static. You might make minor changes, maybe some technology upgrades, but you're largely going to leave it in place for 7 years so you can depreciate it or until the lease ends. And most of the time, that was good enough. Today, what we're seeing is when you look at badge data, a lot of different changes. So there isn't that consistency week over week or even month over month. I was looking at a lot of kind of unique attendance and finding that on a weekly basis, unique attendance is very low, which means the percentage of the population available to come into the office was quite low. You expand that out to a month, you actually saw that you're getting kind of normal counts of people entering the office during the month. But then we try to look at, are they coming in typically on certain days? There's no pattern emerging. Even with return to office, most companies aren't seeing that people are regularly hitting those 3 days a week, the same days. There's a variability. One day, 1 week, they might be in 5 days, next one, come back in 2. So it's more difficult to kind of plan out how do you accommodate them. And from an experience perspective, people want to come in and meet their teams. But if they walk in, there's no one there, or there's lots of people there, they have a very different experience. Similar on space usage, because of that dynamic piece, space is being used differently. As we spoke about earlier, you're seeing conference rooms go from kind of average occupancy of a lot of companies were around 5 average occupants per meeting to post-pandemic about 2. So a lot of individual spaces. There was a great report just came out the other day that the majority of closed door rooms are seeing single occupants. So people are coming in, they might sit at a desk, but they want to get on that phone call. They don't want to disturb others. What do? They go to close the door. There's not enough doors to close. You end up with a single person in a 14-person meeting room. So things have to start to change. And the data is roughly showing that it's inverting. You still need desks. People still need to sit down, check their schedule, do some email, but they're kind of more fluid in that process. And really, they're coming in to get together, collaborate, and that's both in person and with remote participants. I want to pick up on something that James had mentioned around mobility. Traditionally, we kind of thought about mobility as kind of focus on the desk. If you're a highly mobile employee, then you're sharing a desk and you can kind of do desk share ratios. What's great about the data today is now you can actually track how people are using the building in XYZ coordinates. I mean, you can see how they're moving through the floor, what spaces they use. They can see vertically where they're going. Do they go into multiple floors or do they stay on their own floor? Do they flow out if you've got a campus? Are they flowing between buildings? Are there areas of congregation that are kind of that experience points, or are there areas that aren't getting used? And you can even step back and look at a portfolio and find that people are attending, but maybe not their home building. Maybe they go to a building that's closer to their home, or they're on vacations, they go to an office that's different. So a lot of dynamics that are changing. And because of that, you need to basically move more to shared desk environments so you can accommodate that more flexibly. And means there's not really good, clear metrics. How do we measure and allocate space? That's a lot of topics of discussion right now. Is it maybe revenue per square foot, or is there some other metric or experience per square foot? How do you actually understand the relationship between space, experience, people, and kind of that human performance piece? And because of that, you're going to need to be looking at more adaptable spaces, even at a building level. Can a building flex between different uses? Can spaces change? Can you change an office into a huddle room? Can you break up offices or meeting rooms in different spaces? Can you have fluid team space? So you kind of give your own little neighborhood with all of the support functions within it, so a team can interact and exchange for a couple of days, and they move out, another team comes into that space. So we're seeing a lot of shifts, a lot of experimentation. And so with it, I'll talk a little bit about how that's impacting the corporate real estate industry on the next slide here, because it is a fairly big shift in terms of thinking about how you operate your real estate portfolio and what that looks like. Again, a generalization, a lot of corporate real estate organizations, real estate facilities often report up through finance, and it was very structured. You wanted to kind of focus on cost and being very efficient in your operations. So when you needed space, you go and understand how much space you need, where it needs to be. You work with design and construction to get that built out, and facilities would then manage it. And you did that fairly consistently across the portfolio. You could get very efficient. You could basically raise that information up to finance. They're happy. Supply demand, again, often it was one-to-one desking. So if you have 100 people, how many desks do you have available? Do you have space to grow? Do you need to add more space? And a lot of the designs were very efficient and repeatable. So on the plus side, as employees traveled around, they had the very same experience. They saw the same desks, the same furniture, the same conference rooms. And from a design and construction perspective, you had a good handle on how much that space is going to cost to build, design specifications, how to get it built out. And then you'd have IT come in and have a fairly small, tight kit of technology, whether that's in the conference room or the desk. It was fairly efficient to manage from a break fix perspective. You only had to think about a couple of specs or a couple of different products. And then from an operations perspective, traditionally it was service level agreements. So a room or a space is clean when you do X, Y, and Z. So as long as you do those things, the room's clean. Now, as we've shifted things and lots changed in the workplace, you're starting to see more progressive organizations report up into HR people organizations, because that focus is kind of off the dollar and onto the talent, so that human aspect. With that, I'm seeing a bit more cross-functional operations. You need to understand what brings people into an office, what creates a great employee experience. So everyone is a key stakeholder in there. They need to come together to understand, what do we do with our existing space? Do we get in? Do we get out? Do we change the space? Do we move elsewhere? There's a lot of input that's needed to make those decisions. And as you start to think about kind of what the purpose is, it's really around, are we getting the right or appropriate utilization of our assets, and more towards an experience focus? Is it a good experience for employees? Is it purpose built? Is it driving the right business outcomes that we're expecting? To get there, as we talked about earlier, a lot of experimentation. So understand what actually drives value in the workplace, what brings people together. So is it different types of space, different technology, different locations? You're seeing companies move away from the large corporate headquarters and have more distributed offices that are closer to employee populations, so they can get together easily, quickly, in a smaller environment. Sometimes it's space as a service, so not even corporate space per se. Nice space, they move in, 3-year lease, so you can understand how dynamics of the business are changing. They can grow and change and move very quickly. And a lot of that is driven by kind of the rapidly evolving technology. If you think about back to the beginning of the pandemic, okay, a lot of companies had some form of video conferencing, either in the conference room or the desktop, but it was fairly limited use. A lot of times you still had phone calls, email. Hit the pandemic and everyone's on a Zoom call. And actually relating to Zoom, Zoom used to be kind of the, that was the cheap solution to get you going. They had a lot of problems, but within a couple of years, Zoom just leapfrogged a lot of the competition and has a very robust, secure product that everyone knows. And now it's become kind of the default naming for those types of engagements. We also see a lot around just advanced technology, AI, how that's coming into play. I certainly can't live without ChatGPT. I use it daily for a lot of the things I'm doing to help make myself more efficient. That kind of brings me to our last point, thinking about FM services. If you actually continue to work on SLA-driven services, you'd be cleaning conference rooms or floors that may have never gotten used that day or that week. So now looking at using data to say, okay, 4th floor was heavily occupied. Let's devote most of our cleaning resources to that location. We can think more dynamically around what we do with those resources, and giving actually more autonomy back to those personnel to understand, what does clean look like? What does neat look like? They actually have a stake in creating the environment that works, rather than just checking a box to say, I did what you told me to do. So it's actually some good aspects coming out of that. And so really the underline is that we're much more data driven now. That data is really making improvements and help us understand where to spend our money, what's making a difference, and also how are things trending, where are we going in the future.
Where are we headed here? Where's the workplace headed in terms of, we've got the technology, we're measuring, we're looking at a new way of working, a new way of designing workplaces. Where are we headed now?
Yeah, I mean, these are very high level, but the biggest aspect in my mind is the integration of new technologies. And that can be whether that's kind of video collaboration, whether it's AI driven platforms. You can actually pull lots of data in and understand patterns and insights that you couldn't get on your own. You're also seeing new apps coming out. So you actually put the power in employees' hands to find information, make connections, looking at that. Even from a design construction perspective, you're seeing platforms that allow you to actually take live data and use that for your design guidelines that then informs the design. You can start to build it in 3D, review that design, walk through it virtually before you ever build it. So you have a better sense of what you're designing in advance before you put it into place. And that covers a lot with the distributed work models. There's companies that, my favorite example is REI, that built out a wonderful new campus. It's going to be their big headquarters, wonderful outdoor spaces around it. And going into the pandemic, they realized we don't really need this. We actually like to be close to our people, to our stores and our customers. Let's not go there. They sold the campus. Now they've taken on a much more distributed model where they do have a couple corporate leases. They have some spaces of service. They even use co-working, so they can actually really flex at the speed of business and how their business is changing and needs of their customers as well. We talked a bit about employee-centric metrics. There's a lot more focus on kind of that employee experience, employee satisfaction, and kind of that human performance. How do we measure human performance to improve it? So less kind of dollar focused. Talked about sustainability measures, so ESG. Getting a lot more structure around that and even more competition across companies to focus on what steps can they make to be more carbon neutral, to be more responsible, and how do you measure that so you can compare and contrast your performance next to other companies. Flexibility and adaptability, we have to get better at this. Building buildings that are a single purpose, or even space inside that's not flexible, being able to move walls, furniture, change technology, repurpose things so that as the work and workplace change, we can adapt more quickly, more fluidly, and not be focused on kind of depreciating assets. A lot of this, particularly relating back to the technologies around that privacy and ethics. So making sure as we collect data that we're really clear on how we're using that data, who holds the key to that, and how that gets rolled out to the workplace, to employees. And as you know, everyone's got a phone. It knows more about you than you do. We're getting to the point, we're getting closer to understanding more about employees in the workplace to actually give them that great experience and do it proactively. But we need that kind of engagement and agreement that we'll be good stewards of your data and give you this great experience in return. A lot of it comes down to predictive analytics. The more data we collect, the more we understand how things are changing. We can start to think forward of what changes are happening, what things are starting to become more fixed in nature. And so then you can actually prepare for that. We've got some of that now with, we know most offices are Monday through Thursday, so you focus most of your amenities and support those days, and then lesser on Monday and Friday. In the future, being able to have technology allows you to look at, great, you schedule a meeting, Jennifer, we've got 10 people, and the reality is 3 are going to attend remote, 2 are on vacation, so we only need a small meeting room, and the reservation system will actually give you the right meeting room in the proximate location for the team that's coming together. And you don't have to think about it. It'll guide you there and give you the right resources so you're getting more efficient around that. And the last one is still a ways out, but once you start to get these digital models, particularly in 3D, and adding that data, and you start to have a living, breathing model of one, what you have today, and you can look at when you have 10 people in a meeting room, what happens to the air quality? Do we have the right lighting? What's the mood of people? What's the experience? As you start to understand that, then before you even build a building, you can start to actually develop a building in 3D and pressure test and say, what if we do this? What's the impact on mechanical? What do weather conditions do in this location? So you can actually test that out before you actually ever build a building to make sure that it's going to be as fit for purpose as you can get. So it's exciting, a little bit overwhelming. I think that people are kind of skeptical or fearful of AI, and it is going to change things, but it's also allowing us to take in a lot of data sets and really find kind of the best insights out of that to move things forward.
I have a few questions that I'd love to get to, and perhaps we can sort of throw it out as a discussion. But James, I think someone is alluding to a comment that you made earlier, and Brennan, when you were discussing badge counting. So the question here is, why is badge count data not enough? James, maybe you could start us off.
Yeah, I mean, something I say often is like the risk of, sometimes no data is better than bad data, right? Because you have this impression when you look at data that the answers are there and the answers are definitive and immutable. But if you're looking at data that has holes or is misleading in many ways, and you make that assumption that it is definitive and the results are definitive and immutable, it leads you to make decisions that are not based on an actual fact, right? And this is one of the risks with badge count data, right? Like Brennan talked about, coffee badging. as this phenomena that has emerged since in the post-pandemic landscape. You know, we actually had a customer. We have a customer who was using badge count data to report back to their executive on the success of some of the RTO initiatives that they had put into place. And the executive had defined targets, you know, month-over-month targets for what RTO should look like, what building occupancy and how many people, what attendance should look like month over month. And based on the badge count data that they were pulling from their access control system, the real estate team had reported, it was probably 2 or 3 weeks before we were sort of launched and live with them. They'd reported up to their executive saying, like, yeah, everything's looking good. We're exactly where we need to be. We've got we're exactly at the numbers that you wanted us to hit. And, you know, there were applause all around. Once we were up and running and we were able to sort of broaden the perspective they had, broaden the sources of data that they had to really evaluate what was going on in their office, what they started to recognize was that maybe the badge countdown had misled them and unfortunately had led them to report incorrectly up to their executive, because what we were able to show them was that the people who were coming in typically between 11 and 1:30, 11 in the morning and 1:30 in the afternoon. They were staying for, on average, about an hour, a little over an hour. And where they were spending most of their time on site was on the 3rd floor in the cafe. And so what that extra set of data revealed to them was that they weren't really they were getting the number of swipes that they had hoped to get, but it wasn't really affecting the outcome that they were hoping, which is people coming into the office and working, collaborating, and doing all those great things. They just had a lot of people coming into the office to get free lunch. And so it's those blind spots that are endemic to singular and sort of well-defined sources of data, or sort of singular dimensional sources of data, that allow you to infer realities that aren't necessarily true.
I might add, I mean, that can cut both ways. I had an experience where they looked at badge data, didn't compare it to kind of what normal data was like pre-2019, and they came in with very low numbers and said that things look terrible, no one's coming in. And after kind of further assessment, found one is, well, let's look at pre-pandemic versus current. So yes, it's down considerably from pre-pandemic, but that also included the full data set. Here's all the employees and here's how many are attending. It's like, well, but some of these were hired during the period you looked at. Some left the company while you're there. Some were on different forms of leave. So there was a population that's not eligible to attend. And so you're basically docking them for not showing up during that period. So when you take them out, you go a little bit closer. And then also because of distributed nature of the teams, a lot of employees were actually showing up in other buildings, and they're looking at, you're assigned to building A, did you go to building A? When in reality you went to building B and maybe went to building C on different days. So when you started actually bringing a larger data set in, you realized actually attendance wasn't phenomenal, but it was certainly better than expected. And you started to see kind of that movement and engagement, and started to give insights into maybe we need to think differently about what we need to know about our employees, where they're going, who they're meeting with. So it gives you a starting point to then add other data sets to that equation.
We have a couple of different questions here around Wi-Fi. I'll just try to sum them up in one question, but we've tried Wi-Fi. We tried a Wi-Fi solution 3 years ago and found it largely ineffective in capturing data. How has Wi-Fi gotten better or changed and is able to provide this kind of insight? I can maybe James or Brennan?
Sure. Yeah, I can take it. I mean, Wi-Fi as a tool to assess presence analytics or space utilization analytics has been around for some time. The challenge has often been that the accuracy that it can deliver has been really low. And so people who may have tried it over the past decade or so have turned it on, tried to get insight out of the data that it's able to provide to them, and realized there's not enough resolution here to really make any insightful decisions, or to get any insights on which we can base important decisions on. Technology has changed, right? And companies like ours have figured out ways of improving the resolution of data that one can get from their Wi-Fi, such that you can take advantage of a lot of the benefits that are just part and parcel of your Wi-Fi solution. That is, it's covering your full footprint. You're not installing new sensors everywhere. All of these are really great benefits, but all of those benefits don't mean anything if the data that you get isn't of high enough resolution to make good decisions. And so we figured out, we among us have figured out, how do you do this in a better way so that you can actually capitalize on those benefits and get more high resolution data from your Wi-Fi, so that you can start to use it right away and start to get some of those benefits. So I think the long and short of that is really, like, technology has evolved since maybe a lot of people first tried to leverage their Wi-Fi to get this kind of data, and it isn't what it used to be.
We have a question here just about how companies are actually using this. So the question is, how are companies actually using this to affect change, and what kinds of decisions are being made with this data? So Kevin and Brennan, I know you're both on the front lines and client facing. Maybe you could just talk to us a little bit about some of the decisions that companies are actually using this data to make and how they're making real change within their organizations.
Yeah, I think I'll pick on some of the things that are more interesting because it's very new thinking. So one of them is kind of that dynamic floors where you're understanding kind of how much traffic is coming into the building, how long are they there, what are they doing in that space. And when you really start to get that high fidelity data that James was talking about, you see kind of the movement and engagement, and you can think differently about maybe we need to co-locate teams rather than have them separated in floors because they're doing too much travel between floors. You can find which groups don't connect, and maybe you can separate those. So you can actually do a lot of better blocking and stacking to get people in the right locations where there's more meaningful connection. And oftentimes it allows you to then maybe even condense the number of floors, at least certain days of the week, and allow that flexibility of space. And now you get kind of better engagement on a floor because you got kind of more normalized occupancy on a floor, and you're getting the right people to be in the right places at the right time to help kind of support those serendipitous interactions. I mean, that's where we're getting tying that high fidelity data into kind of that people equation and really making it matter.
Yeah, I think another one that comes to mind, unique cases, is a lot of organizations are looking how they can make this data forward facing. So how they can, use this data to enhance the employee experience. We see this on larger campuses. What are the wait times to go get food at the cafeteria? Are there busy areas? I mentioned the ping pong rooms or the games rooms. How many people are in there now? Are these areas that I can go and use? Are there lounge areas that are busy? How do I get to these specific spaces? Really making it forward facing, which meeting rooms are being utilized at what time? Talking with a school, a higher ed education institution in the South, they want to use it to understand utilization in the library, so students don't have to walk across campus to get to the library and find out that it's full, be able to pull up an app, see that it's there. So enhancing the employee experience, I think, is one that a lot of people don't think about, but it's a really interesting way that this data can, not only inform the decisions for workplace strategists, real estate teams, but it can also, inform the employee themselves of what spaces they can use, when, how, and what's the best time to do all these things. So I think that's another really interesting way that people are using this data.
I'll just add on, but I think that forward facing or that employee facing piece is really important, right? Like there are really two ways we can improve overall space utilization. You can do it in a reactive way, and you can observe that space is underutilized, figure out what reasons that it is underutilized, and then go and make changes to those spaces, and that's kind of reactive to the data. But then what Brennan's talking about is being proactive, is allowing the people who are actually using the space to make better decisions about how they're going to use the space today, right? To improve utilization. So a simple example is if the cafe is busy right now, I'm not going to go. I'm going to go in half an hour or an hour from now when it's less busy, and I'm going to go instead. I'm going to catch up on my email. I'm going to sit down in this collaboration space and have a quick chat with my colleagues or what have you. So you can allow people to actually make better choices and change the way they behave in space in order to drive up utilization. It isn't always about being reactive and having to change the physical space in order to suit the people. You can have the people change their behavior as well.
Before we step out, that's going to actually pull one thread that Brennan mentioned is on education. There's actually a lot of parallels between higher education and office, and we've talked a lot about office, but this data can be really insightful for universities that are going through a lot of change. I've got 3 kids that are in college right now, so I get to compare and contrast my experience to theirs. And they're seeing shifts in kind of need or less need for large kind of lecture halls, things like that, trying to align kind of student preference to the size of spaces and locations, and looking at dynamics of does the physics department operate different than humanities? And then that allows them to kind of rethink how space is allocated to different departments, even looking at what's the traffic of students, where do they cross campus? I think I forget the university that used it before, they actually would plant grass, allow students to kind of make their trails through it and say, okay, this is a logical place to put a sidewalk. So we're now doing that digitally. We're taking that digital trail of students moving around and understanding where are they going, how do we optimize or improve that experience, and also what does it mean for the campus, how can they operate more efficiently and more successfully. So it's exciting to kind of see those parallels, and of course that's our future workforce is going to come out into the workplace. So how do we kind of use that to kind of prepare them and prepare us to get that workspace right and accommodate incoming employees.
To the end of our workshop today. I want to take this opportunity to thank our panelists, Kevin, Brennan, and James. Thank you so much for your time today. And thanks to all of you who joined us today. Just to note that we will be sending out the presentation to everyone. And I would invite you that if you're looking for more information about the Innerspace platform, you can certainly reach out to Brennan. I've included the contact information here. And if you're looking for more information and some, really great and interesting work that Kevin is doing within this industry, please reach out to Kevin directly as well. Thank you again, gentlemen, for an incredible discussion, and looking forward to seeing where this is headed, where this is an exciting time. So thanks again.